Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to today's conference, a joint event by PGE Polska Grupa Energetyczna and Ørsted company, where after over a dozen months of negotiations with our business partner, the global leader of the offshore industry, Ørsted company, and together we are starting the preparation and building as well as future operation of Baltica 2 and 3 wind farms. It's our great pleasure to host you, unfortunately online, but still it's very good to be together. We wish to tell you a little bit about those projects, but first and foremost we're here at your disposal. Should you have any questions, in the latter part of our meeting you have an opportunity of asking such questions, and we will be here for you. In today's conference, we will have Mr. Wojciech Dąbrowski, CEO of PGE Polska Grupa Energetyczna. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And online, we have Mr. Rasmus Turbo, Deputy President of Ørsted Offshore, responsible for continental Europe. Welcome. Mr. President, the construction of Baltica 2 and 3 offshore wind farms is a very important project from the point of view of Poland's economy, also from the point of view of the Polish energy system. It's also a very crucial project from the point of view of the climate policy. Why don't you tell us how the construction of these two wind farms will change the picture of Poland's power generation and the shape of PGE Group? Ladies and gentlemen, the agreement signed with the Ørsted company provides for joint construction of two huge wind farms in the Baltic Sea with a total capacity of 2.5 gigawatts. The farms to be built together with Ørsted are among the most advanced offshore projects in Poland. First electricity from these farms will reach consumers in 2026. Baltica 2 and Baltica 3 will provide green energy for 4 million households. The farms will avoid more than 8 million tons of CO2 emissions annually. Ørsted is the company with the largest portfolio of completed offshore wind farm projects in the world. And we, PGE, are the largest energy company in Poland with extensive experience in large energy investments, including renewable energy sources. Therefore, our cooperation is a guarantee of success of this investment. We'll be running this project together, sharing knowledge, experience, as also responsibility. We have an agreed manner of operation, a common team, and division of roles. All the decisions will be made unanimously. Already today, PGE has unique competences in the field of onshore farms. These competences, in cooperation with our partner, will be deepened and complemented. The offshore wind farm project is an important project for the energy system, but also of great economic importance. We will ensure that Poland's economy gains as much as possible from the development of onshore wind farms in the exclusive Polish economic zone in the Baltic Sea. Therefore, it's very important to create proper development opportunities for all Polish companies interested in this market. Over 100 Polish companies have already been identified to be involved in the process of preparation, construction, operation of wind farms in the Baltic Sea. This is a huge chance to activate Polish ports, steel and shipbuilding industries, but also to develop other sectors. The construction of offshore wind farms with an installed capacity of 6 gigawatts by 2030, because that's the point of the first stage of the program by 2030, will generate an additional 60 billion zlotys of GDP and result in the creation of over 70,000 new jobs. The offshore energy potential in the Baltic Sea by 2030 is estimated at about 11 gigawatts, and the estimated total value of investments in the offshore wind projects equals 160 billion zlotys. Offshore is the most important element of investments included in the strategy of PGE Group, which is in line with the adopted energy policy of Poland until 2040. We're developing renewable resources, but we also treat conventional power generation as a strategic energy reserves necessary to ensure Poland's energy security. Only the development of nuclear power of Poland may change the situation. Offshore projects will forever change not only the image of our company, but also the energy sector and the entire Polish economy. The wind of green change is blowing from the Baltic Sea. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now we try to connect to Denmark, Mr. Rasmus Turbo. I hope you can hear us. As you have heard, PGE Group is changing also owing to the fact that we should be investing in offshore farms. Owing to the cooperation between PGE and Ørsted, PGE will be expanding and building its potential in terms of offshore wind farms. Why don't you tell us how we are supposed to understand it? Because as Mr. Dombrowski has said, it will be our joint project. We will be both actively involved and we will be developing it together. What are the benefits for your company from the cooperation with PGE, and why is the offshore area in the Baltic Sea an interesting location for you to invest? Why don't you tell us?
Hello, Rasmus Turbo here. I think first and foremost, before I dig into talking a little bit about the transaction and also Ørsted, I would really like to express my appreciation for the fact that we have now been able to sign this agreement with between PGE and Ørsted. It is also for Ørsted a very big deal. It is not every day that you enter into a new market together with a partner like PGE for 2.5 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. So it is indeed a very happy day also for Ørsted. I think a few points to mention from my side would be that when I look at PGE on the one hand side and Ørsted on the other hand side, I see very much a very complementary partnership. With PGE being the biggest utility in Poland and also, I guess you can say, the leader within offshore wind in Poland, partnering up with Ørsted being the global leader within offshore wind. That is a very good match, and I firmly believe that the complementary skills of each of our two organizations here are a perfect fit. On top of that, we both share the same strategic aspiration, which is also something that we appreciate. If we then zoom in on Ørsted just a little bit, also because many of you may not know us very well yet. As said, we are the global leader within offshore wind. We are majority owned by the Danish state. We are active across Scandinavia, Poland, the US, UK, APAC, so basically across the world. We have a portfolio of offshore wind capacity that will get to roughly 10 gigawatts by 22 and expectedly 15 gigawatts by 25. So we are indeed sort of a offshore wind leading player. If you want to understand Ørsted a little bit better, I think a very significant part of our heritage now is the transformation that we have undergone over the last decade. Today we are the most sustainable energy company in the world, but we were certainly not born like that. Only 13 years ago we were a Danish utility with more than 90% of our generation capacity coming from fossil fuels. And we were actually at that point in time omitting more than a third of the entire CO2 emission of Denmark. So over this a decade, we have reduced our CO2 emissions with almost 90%. We have doubled our earnings and completely transformed our earnings mix, and we have gone from having only 1 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity into today having more than 11 gigawatts of total capacity, including onshore. I think another important point to understand when thinking about Ørsted is that we have an integrated business model along the full supply chain or a full life cycle of a wind farm. From development, building, operating, and owning. And we are almost 3,000 specialists working only on offshore wind. So with this partnership, we of course intend, as also highlighted by Mr. Dombrowski earlier today, we intend to bring all of that knowledge to Poland and to PGE, because that is of course an important part of what we bring to the table is the experience of building offshore wind farm. And we look very much forward to the close collaboration with PGE in building our joint capabilities in Poland. I think another and maybe final point to make from my side would be a few words about the local supply chain. It has been highlighted also earlier today by Mr. Dombrowski, the number of Polish companies working expectedly with offshore wind going forward, etc., which I agree to. I think from our perspective, it is important to emphasize that we, as Ørsted, have very extensive experience working with the local supply chain, basically in all of the countries that we have entered. So whether it is Europe or the US or also APAC, more specifically Taiwan, building up the capabilities of the local supply chain, ramping that up, is a very important part of also our business model. And with Poland, it's a little bit of a different thing and a better thing, in the sense that Poland is, as I'm sure you know, already today having a very integral part, or being a very integral part of the supply chain for offshore wind in Europe. So you're already very much working with offshore wind. We just need to now also actually build offshore wind farms in Poland. So from an Ørsted perspective, we have been working with many Polish suppliers on also wind farms outside of Poland to date, in the UK, in Taiwan on Changwon 1 and 2, in Holland as well, working with many Polish tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. And we are absolutely confident that the Polish supply chain will be able to meet the challenge now with 11 gigawatt of offshore wind coming towards 2040, and basically ramp up the entire supply chain of Poland. At the end of the day, it of course comes down to the competitiveness, but we have no reason to believe that the Polish supply chain will not be hugely competitive constructing offshore wind farms in Poland, but also being a hub for the Baltic Sea, and also continuing to support the very, very significant build-out of offshore wind that we will see across Europe in the many years to come. I think those were my most important points, and I would just like to one more time emphasize on behalf of Ørsted, on behalf of our European team, on behalf of our Polish team on the ground, that we are very excited to embark on this journey together with PGE. Thank you very much.
Okay, it seems that we have finished the part connected with the presentation by Mr. Rasmus Turbo. Thank you very much, sir. And as announced, we would now like to pass on to the Q&A session. The procedure of asking questions will be as follows. It's very important for us that you keep your cameras on. Please indicate that you wish to ask a question, and once online, please state your first and last name as well as the medium you represent, and it would be nice if you could indicate who the question is addressed to. Ms. Okshinska, can you hear me all right? Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to ask a question about the cost. This is a question to Mr. Dąbrowski. What is the total Capex of those two projects, and what will be the specific PGE involvement? How are you supposed to fund it? And will you be able to obtain this funding without isolating coal-based assets from the company? Good morning, ma'am. Well, today we estimate that the construction of 1 megawatt of power offshore costs about 13 million zlotys. It's an estimate, so by multiplying it by 2.5 megawatts, you can estimate it would be about 30 billion zlotys. So we estimate it at from 30 to 40 billion zlotys. This is the total cost of construction. Our involvement will be about 50% because our company with Ørsted is a 50-50 company. So both companies will be participating in the Capex on equal terms. As regards the funding, we would obviously like to do it as an off-balance sheet project under project finance, so that the indebtedness does not affect PGE Group. There's a huge involvement of all global banks and funding institutions to fund the project. We're involved in various talks both with Polish and international banks, as well as international investment funds, which are interested in funding the Polish offshore area, which shows that this is an attractive element of the power generation industry, providing interesting prospects for funding institutions as regards the return. So we can see we have no reasons to be concerned about obtaining funding, and a separation of coal-based assets to a different entity is not necessary. But as regards this project is under the auspices of the state treasury assets. Now, you asked about the talks with the social side, but I'm not sure if you asked this question, but let me just tell you that the consultations with the social party are underway. Thank you very much. We can see Mr. Wojciech Kryczkowski wants to ask a question. We'll try to reconnect. Can you hear me this time? Yes, it's perfect this time. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Mr. President. The question is as follows. Recently, PGE signed a letter of intent with Enea and Tauron on the construction of next wind farms. It was about the end of the 2030s, and Enea and Tauron had their business partners. I mean, Enea did, and it gave up, and Tauron, I think, it was on the lookout for such partners or is still looking for them. So the question is whether, in light of this project, will Ørsted be also a partner for the construction of the next wind farms to be built in the 2030s? The construction of the contract of the LOI with Tauron and Enea is to intensify the contacts with other electricity companies and not to compete with each other. As regards new investments, the decisions have not been made with PGE on the formula, but we are not precluding a cooperation with the international partner, and obviously Ørsted company will obviously be taken into account. That's clear enough. Thank you very much. We can see that Ms. Graniszewska would like to ask a question. Please turn on your mic and ask a question. Good morning. I have two questions. Good morning. The first one being on the 50-50 split that you share with the investor. There's also a project applied by Orlen, which involved a minority package. The question is whether you have also talked about such a split where Ørsted would have a minority stake, and what would be the benefits and downsides. And the other question, I'd like to ask you about the price level as of today. Well, as regards the 50-50 formula, this is a solution applied in most investment projects globally. This is what we assumed in 2018 when we launched the transparent tender. Many companies joined that tender, and Ørsted submitted the most interesting bid. That's why we started the negotiations with Ørsted. It took over a dozen months to negotiate, and a number of contracts concluded between our companies are complementary in nature, because it was about a contract about the preparation of the investment, the construction, as well as the assumptions for the maintenance and service. That's why it took over a dozen months. It's described in great details. We'll be treating each other as partners. 50-50 means equal participation in the Capex. Let me remind you that Ørsted, for joining the business and assuming new shares to be issued by us, will be paying 657 million zlotys, and of course, it will depend on the difference contract, so there might be additional payments, but this will all be clarified once the differential contract is approved by ERO. So hopefully we will know what the contract amount will be, probably in about 1.5 years. That's what we would wish for. And this 50-50 formula assumes total partnership between us. And as I've said already, the decisions will be made unanimously, and it will be very important to agree on joint assumptions for the tender, because as you know, in this business, the amount of supplies is very important, and of services. As regards the supplies, we will be developing the assumptions together with our business partner, and the decisions will be made unanimously. This is also a security measure. As regards the CO2 prices, of course, the prices have soared. It's about 38 euro today. I'm not sure what it is today because I haven't checked it yet, but obviously these are amounts which show that the assumption we've made, i.e. energy transformation, the transformation of PGE towards green energy, is the only way of maintaining the group's strong position in the market going forward, and to go for renewable energy investments. without forgetting the strategic reserve, which the fossil fuels will still constitute for the next 20 or even 30 years, because we're talking about 2050 as the total decarbonization year. So by then, the resources fired by hard coal and lignite will still be the most utmost important. And as regards photovoltaics and wind assets, they will complement it in the transitory period as an addition to coal, and then in line with the energy strategy and the Polish nuclear power program, there will be 6 nuclear plants built in Poland as a base. Thank you very much. In that case, I think we can pass on to the next question. I think we would be very grateful if you could just signal it by raising your hand in Zoom, or raise your hand physically. I can see a hand. So, Mr. Czyżewski, can you please ask your question? Good morning. Okay, very briefly, 2 questions. The first one being about the fact that Ørsted is supposed to be a 50% shareholder in the companies. Does this mean that in future, once energy derived from the offshore farms is sold to Polish consumers, will Ørsted also be deriving 50% of its profits? And the other question is about those 100 Polish companies that you mentioned. What is the structure? I mean, roughly. What are the companies that can benefit from the entire offshore wind farm project in the Baltic? As regards this 50-50 split, it's about the interest in the company. So the profits will belong to the entity, and the potential profits will be shared by both companies, both PGE and Ørsted, on a 50-50 basis. As regards the structure of Polish companies, we've been contacted by many companies from the electricity sector, such ones which want to be involved in the construction of the inland infrastructure, i.e. the connection to power and transformers. There are also companies which deliver steel elements. So also there's a large interest from this industry. As regards subcontractors, mostly it's the energy sector, steel constructions. These are mostly the companies that are interested. Also shipyards are interested, because mind you that for the transport of monopiles to the sea, it takes a vessel or even 2. So we would, I think, all wish to ensure that this huge investment project could help propel the shipbuilding industry, so that these vessels are built in Poland. As you know, today, I think for the transport of such monopiles of 200 meters in length, I think there are 2 or 3 such vessels globally. So I think if we could manage to build such a ship in Poland, it would be very welcome. And we're trying to persuade Polish shipyards to build such vessels. Today, the construction of such a ship is estimated at 1 to even 1.5 billion zlotys. These are huge costs, but of course, such a vessel would have a lot to do in the Baltic Sea for the next 10 or 15 years. And there is a lot of interest with the potential contractors. We have already started such meetings, and we will be continuing them, so that Polish companies have transparent knowledge about the tenders so that they have time to prepare. It will not constitute exclusive knowledge addressed to specific companies. It will be very transparent so that all companies can build their competences and capacities so they can benefit from it also in financial terms.
If I may, with a few comments. Importance of the local supply chain and also in bringing in these several local companies. I think it is very important from an Ørsted perspective to be very explicit about that we in the last many years have extensive experience in building. I'm being informed that you cannot hear me again. Is that correct?
Yes, słyszymy.
Okay. So that we have very extensive experience in building up local supply chains in the markets that we are in. And we see that as a very important element of doing business in new markets. We have done it together with the local supply chain across Europe, in the US, and also in APAC. So we fully share the ambitions and the desire of the government, but also PGE, fully aligned here in terms of using these very big opportunity of building 2.5 gigawatts as an opportunity to ramp up the local supply chain. And I think it is also very important to emphasize, and I know you know this, but this is not a new thing for local supply chain in Poland. We Ørsted have been working together with local supply chain in Poland on many of our outside of Poland in the last many years. We have been working with ADR, Net Industries, PK Wind, a lot of other companies on wind farms in the UK, on wind farms in APAC, on wind farms in Holland. So we see this also as a big opportunity to together with PGE to ramp up the local supply chain, which is already today competitive. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to, Mr. Dombrowski also very rightly said, it comes down to competition, and we have no reason to believe that the Polish supply chain will not continue to be very competitive here. So we see this as a very big opportunity.
Thank you very much. It seems that we can reconnect to Mr. Sawicki. Great, thank you. Mr. Dombrowski, I'd like to ask you about some of your statements from last fall when you mentioned in Szczecin that there was an interest from American investment funds in terms of the Polish offshore investments. And let me also ask you about the time frame of submitting the applications to ERO by the 31st of March. In other words, will PGE make it in time to submit them in such a short time frame? Yes, of course, there's a lot of interest from US investment funds, but not only US investment funds. As I mentioned in fall, there's a lot of interest from various financial institutions interested in funding that investment. And along with our business partners, our agreement with our business partner assumes that each partner is supposed to ensure the 50% of their funding, and Ørsted half, and we also 50%, and we want to do it on an off-balance sheet mode. There's a lot of interest from various funds and funding institutions, as I mentioned. And when it comes to the other issue, let me just repeat it. Perhaps my colleague asked you also about whether you can manage to submit the application. Yes, obviously, we will do it in time. We're aware of the deadline and prepared, and I'm sure that we will be submitting that application in due time. Please have no doubt about that. We are professionals and we are very much prepared for this. And I'd also like to ask you about the detailed time frame. When do you think the construction should be launched physically? It's not about the shovel, digging the first shovel, but it's rather starting the work on sea. And when do you think the funding should be prepared to make it in time? As regards the construction of offshore wind farms, in terms of the execution, preparation takes much longer than the execution, because the work of specialists on the sea is very expensive. Also, when it comes to the hiring of vessels, and the very construction is highly costly. Therefore, it takes a very thorough preparation to ensure as short as possible a period of execution. Therefore, we assume that the execution will take a maximum of 2 years, and the first electricity should reach consumers from Baltica 3 in 26 and from Baltica 2 in 27. Therefore, we assume that 2 years before, or perhaps less than that, will be the construction time, because it's essential to prepare the construction as best you can, to commit as few mistakes in the course of the construction, because mistakes are time and time is money. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anyone else online? Mr. Kryczkowski would like to ask another question. Let's try to connect. Let me perhaps ask one more question. Who will have the largest impact on choosing the manufacturer of turbines? Will PGE be interested in ordering the items for the towers in Poland? And what will be the impact on the project, supposing that the installation port mentioned by the government is not executed in time? Okay, when it comes to the turbines, we will be doing it together, and the preparations for each tender will also be made together. There are no preferences when it comes to the manufacturer, which is obvious. The supplies of the turbines are essential and the most cost-intensive element of the entire investment, as well as future maintenance. We will be doing it together. When it comes to PGE, we have vast experience when it comes to that. We are actually the only company, I haven't heard of any other company in Europe to have so highly specialized maintenance team in terms of onshore wind farms when it comes to turbines. Therefore, we will be interested in involving our specialists together with our partners, Ørsted's specialists. The entire investment will be done in terms of multi-contracting, which means we will not be using a contract engineer, i.e. an intermediary, to organize the construction. That's why Ørsted's bid was attractive for us, because Ørsted is hugely experienced in that, and we assume that the construction will be cheaper than one done via a contract engineer, and that is our assumption. Okay. The installation port. Okay, the installation port. Of course, intense work is underway. The preliminary location has been chosen, and I don't assume that an installation port will not be executed in Poland, because it would be very bad for the investment if we had to ship the items from Scandinavia or from Germany. So we just don't take no for an answer. We don't assume that there would be no installation port in Poland, and PGE, even though it's not our investment, but we will be very much involved in this to intensify the work, to motivate all the stakeholders responsible for building that port, for the decisions to be made as soon as possible and the construction to start as soon as possible. Because when it comes to the port, all those decisions have to be made very quickly, as well as the entire transformation of the energy sector, and in terms of offshore, our schedule is very tight. We're meeting the schedule, but it's very tight, yet realistic. Okay, thank you very much. We still have another moment. If you're wishing to ask any questions, I'll be grateful for raising your hand or signaling it otherwise. Okay, Mr. Zasun, can we connect with the gentleman? Can you hear us, sir? Good morning. I haven't plugged in my earphones. There's some background noise, but hopefully you can hopefully you can hear me. I have two questions. Firstly, around the support for Capex. I know that there's work underway for the National Reconstruction Plan. Have you submitted an application for support, and what would be the amount? And the other question is about the operating support, which is being worked on right now within the team, probably finished by now. Do you have any signals what would be the support level? And is it consistent with your expectations? And is the draft regulation being consulted with you? The draft regulation, when it comes to the assumptions for the draft regulation, of course, we have submitted our remarks and our expectations. Obviously, the ultimate decision will be made at the Ministry of Climate and the Ministry of State Assets. And at the end of the day, it will be the ERO and the European Commission, and then ERO again. So there's still quite some work ahead. The ministries are aware of our expectations, but obviously the decision will not be made by us. We would like for the contract to be as high as possible, because it will ensure the profitability of this project. We're waiting for the announcement of the amount. It will also determine the ultimate decision on starting the investment, but our expectations are well known, and I assume that the investor expectations will be balanced somehow, because mind you that we're not the only investor at the sea to carry out an investment. They will probably be collected and an amount will be announced. For an investment to be carried out, it takes the difference contract, and then the ultimate investment decision will be made along with our partner, actually each of the companies on their own, and then together, the moment we have all the data on the Capex expected, and that's the kind of data we will have after the tenders have been launched and closed, as well as the difference contract. So it will take probably a year and a half up to 2 years. Of course, the contract concluded today with Ørsted is a contingent contract, because it will still take an approval from the antitrust office. I assume we will obtain it because we're not infringing any regulations, and then having that approval, we will get back to the table and make a decision whether we will be pursuing that. But we assume this will be a positive decision. I also asked you about the Capex support. Yes, we have submitted it, the offshore project, to the National Reconstruction Program. While we wait and see, hopefully the money to support will reach us. This is a key investment also in terms of Poland's energy security. It's one of the crucial elements, and we assume to obtain some support in these terms. What would be the amount? I would not like to mention the amount because, frankly speaking, I don't remember exactly what the submission was, but I'm sure it's a large amount. I can just submit it to you later after the conference. Thank you very much. I've also seen we're drawing to a close of the conference. We still have time for one more question. I've seen Ma'am Graniszewska, who wanted to get back to us with one more question. Can we bring her back? Alluding to the discussion around the terminal and the vessels, I'd like to ask whether PGE will get financially or operationally involved in such investments. We're interested in making sure that this vessel is built in Poland. We're involved in talks with potential contractors. Obviously, these talks are underway, and I'm not authorized to reveal any details of those negotiations. But obviously, we would like to make sure that this is a Polish vessel. I mean, it would be everybody's wish, as it seems, to make sure that it's a Polish vessel. What does it mean that PGE is involved in negotiations of shipbuilders? I mean, Polish shipyards have contacted us whether we would be interested in their services should the vessel be constructed. We would. We can make this declaration. And in terms of the terminal, is it similar? When it comes to the terminal, we are also involved in such negotiations, yes. Thank you. It seems that the Q&A session has been exhausted. Thank you very much for your participation in today's conference. Hopefully, we have answered all your questions. If you have any questions that have not been addressed by us, we are at your disposal. Please contact PGE's press office and Ørsted's press office, and I'm sure that we'll be able to address any questions that we haven't been able to answer today. Thank you very much for your participation, and see you soon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rasmus, and see you again. Thank you very much.